Ling stepped off the train and into the small town with a suitcase in one hand and a fragile hope in her heart. The crisp air smelled of wood smoke and damp earth, so different from the warm, bustling streets of her hometown in China. She had come here with dreams, dreams of a new life, of a husband who would welcome her, and of a family she could belong to. But those dreams had crumbled before she even arrived. The man she was supposed to marry had vanished, leaving no word, no explanation, nothing but the silence that now pressed heavily on her chest. Ling had imagined smiles and introductions, a warm hand to hold, but instead, she found herself alone in a foreign land where every face seemed indifferent and every word spoken sounded strange and distant. Her first days were a blur of confusion. She wandered through the streets, uncertain of where to go, overwhelmed by signs she couldn't read and voices she couldn't understand. People walked past her, wrapped in their routines, barely noticing the young woman with the hesitant eyes and trembling hands. She tried to smile, tried to speak, but words stumbled awkwardly, often earning only confused looks or polite nods that made her feel even smaller. At night, she returned to the tiny rented room she could barely afford, its walls thin and its windows rattling with the evening wind. There, in the dim light, she let herself cry. Soft sobs escaped, filling the emptiness of the room. She had been wanted once, at least, that's what she had believed, but now, she felt abandoned, cast aside as if she had never mattered. Ling thought about her family back home. They had sent her off with well-meaning advice, smiles, and a few words of encouragement that now felt hollow. They had not seen her despair, her loneliness, or the quiet ache of rejection that gnawed at her spirit. She thought of the friends she left behind, of the laughter and chatter she would no longer hear, of the small comforts she had taken for granted. Here, she was nothing. A stranger, unseen, unheard, and unwanted. And yet, beneath the weight of her sorrow, a small ember of hope remained. Ling reminded herself that this was only the beginning, that perhaps the town held surprises she could not yet imagine. Maybe, she thought, there was a place where she could belong, even if it seemed impossible now. But that thought felt fragile, fleeting, and it was quickly swallowed by the fear that she had misjudged the world, that her arrival had been a mistake, and that no one would ever look at her and see her as anything more than a stranger in a strange land. Ling curled into herself on the thin mattress, clutching the suitcase that still smelled faintly of home. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered into the quiet room, "Does anyone want me?" The walls offered no answer, and the night carried only the soft wind outside. She fell asleep with a heavy heart, alone, yet clinging to the tiniest spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would come along and prove that she was not invisible, that she was not unwanted, that her story was far from over. Ling's days began to settle into a quiet rhythm, though the loneliness still clung to her like a shadow. She found work at a small bakery tucked between a florist and a bookstore. The work was simple but honest, kneading dough, arranging pastries, and serving customers who barely noticed her presence. She learned a few words of the local language each day, careful to practice when no one was watching, speaking softly to herself as she rolled dough or wiped counters. Life was monotonous, yet it was safe, and for Ling, safety was a small comfort in a world that felt uncertain. One afternoon, heavy rain poured down, drenching the streets and sending people scurrying for shelter. Ling, carrying a basket of fresh bread, noticed a small figure huddled on a park bench beneath a drooping tree. The girl's clothes were soaked, her tiny shoes splashed with mud, and her shoulders shook with quiet sobs. Something inside Ling stirred, a feeling she had not experienced in weeks. She hesitated, unsure if she should approach, afraid of intruding, afraid of being rejected once again. But the sound of the child's quiet distress was impossible to ignore. Ling stepped closer and held out her umbrella. The little girl looked up, her tear-streaked face blinking against the rain. She did not flinch, and for a moment, Ling was caught off guard by the bravery and trust in the child's eyes. Ling crouched down, offering the umbrella and her softest smile. "Do you need help?" she asked, her words halting and imperfect. The girl nodded, sniffing, and took Ling's hand without hesitation. They walked together to the edge of the park, sharing the small umbrella. Ling learned that the girl's name was Emma and that she had been waiting for her mother, who had gone to run errands and was taking longer than expected. Emma chattered about her day, her words tumbling out in a rush, punctuated by questions and observations about everything they passed. Ling listened, sometimes uncertain of the words, but understanding the meaning through Emma's gestures and expressions. When they reached the girl's home, Emma turned to Ling, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and curiosity. "Do you want to play again tomorrow?" she asked softly. Ling felt a pang in her chest, a mix of joy, fear, and something she couldn't quite name. She nodded, and for the first time in months, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with safety or survival, but with connection. Ling realized that in this little girl, she had found something she hadn't known she was missing. Someone who saw her, who needed her, who trusted her. As she walked home in the lingering rain, her shoes squelching against the wet cobblestones, Ling allowed herself to imagine a world where maybe, just maybe, she was not completely alone, a world where her heart could open again, one small step at a time. As passed, and the small connection Ling had formed with Emma grew into something deeper, something she hadn't realized she had been starving for. Ling found herself thinking about the little girl constantly, wondering if she was safe, if she had eaten well, if she had smiled today. Emma, too, seemed to seek Ling out at every opportunity, running up with bright eyes and a mischievous grin that made Ling's chest ache with warmth. Together, they developed a quiet rhythm. Ling would help Emma with her homework after school, guiding her through numbers and letters that seemed so simple to others but challenging in a foreign language for the child. Emma's laughter filled Ling's tiny apartment as they played board games or colored pictures, and for the first time in months, Ling felt that her presence mattered. At first, Ling resisted the title that Emma playfully gave her, Mommy. She laughed nervously when the girl said it, brushing it off as a child's imagination. She was afraid of letting herself believe it, afraid of the responsibility, afraid of loving someone who might be taken away. Ling had known rejection too intimately to allow herself to hope for something permanent. But each day, Emma's trust chipped away at Ling's walls. When Emma ran into her arms, calling her, Mommy, Ling felt an ache she could not ignore, a tender pull in her heart that whispered she belonged somewhere, that she could matter to someone in a way that went far beyond survival. Their afternoons were filled with simple joys that carried extraordinary meaning. Ling would bake small cakes with Emma, letting her sprinkle sugar on top with messy hands. Emma would tell stories about school, about friends, about dreams of adventures they could have together. Ling listened, laughed, and sometimes corrected, but mostly, she just absorbed the joy and wonder of the little girl's world. Ling began to notice subtle changes in herself, too. She smiled more easily, felt lighter in her chest, and started speaking more confidently in the local language, fueled by the connection that Emma had sparked. She was no longer just surviving, she was living. One evening, as Emma fell asleep beside her after a long day of play, Ling watched the steady rise and fall of the child's chest and felt a tear slip down her cheek. She had been unwanted, invisible, and alone for so long that she had forgotten how it felt to be seen, to be needed, to be loved. Now, in the quiet darkness, she realized that Emma had not only accepted her but had given her a place in the little girl's heart, a place she had feared she would never have. Ling pressed a gentle kiss to Emma's forehead and whispered softly, I'll always be here, Emma. The words hung in the air like a promise, and Ling allowed herself, finally, to believe that maybe she could be more than a stranger, more than a shadow in a foreign town. She could be someone's anchor, someone's home, and maybe, if she was brave enough, someone's mommy after all. Ling's days had begun to feel full in a way she had never imagined possible, but the past, like an uninvited shadow, crept back into her thoughts. One morning, a letter arrived from her family in China. She hesitated to open it, her hands trembling. When she finally did, the words inside weighed heavily on her heart. Her parents wrote with concern, questioning why she had stayed in a foreign country alone, hinting that she had wasted her chances at a proper life. They reminded her of duty, of family expectations, and of the shame of being in a place without a husband or prospects. Ling felt a mix of anger, guilt, and fear. They did not understand her life here, her struggles, or the quiet joy she had begun to know. For days, Ling wrestled with the decision of whether to return home or stay. Every moment with Emma had become precious, yet the letter haunted her. She imagined leaving, returning to the familiar faces and streets she had once called home, but the thought felt hollow now. She looked at Emma, who greeted her each morning with unbridled excitement, who clung to her hand and laughed at her small jokes, who trusted her in a way Ling had never been trusted before. How could she leave this little life behind? And yet, Fear whispered that she might not be enough, that Emma's real mother could return, or that the authorities would say she wasn't allowed to stay, or that her family would disown her. One evening, after Ling had spent hours staring at the letter, Emma curled up beside her on the couch, sensing her worry. The little girl's small hand found Ling's, squeezing it gently. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice soft and earnest, "can you be my mommy forever?" Those words cut through the fear and doubt like sunlight through clouds. Ling's chest tightened, tears welling in her eyes. She realized in that moment that love was not about bloodlines, family obligations, or expectations from strangers. It was about presence, care, and trust. Emma needed her, and she, for the first time, recognized that she could need Emma just as deeply. Ling spent that night thinking long into the dark hours, weighing every possibility and fear. But the question repeated in her mind, "Can you be my mommy forever?" and with it came a revelation. She could return to her past, follow the demands of others, and suppress the bond that had formed with this small, fearless girl. Or she could choose the life she had built here, imperfect, uncertain, yet full of connection and love, a life where she could finally belong. By morning, Ling made her decision. She would stay. She would face the challenges, the skepticism, and the uncertainty, but she would do it for Emma, and for herself. No letter, no expectation, no fear could outweigh the quiet, unshakable truth she felt in her heart. She had found a family in the most unexpected place, and she would not let it go. As Emma slept peacefully beside her, Ling hugged her close and whispered a promise into the quiet room, a promise to herself as much as to the little girl. She would be there, always. Ling's decision to stay brought both relief and an anxious anticipation she had never known before. She began the long, complicated process of becoming Emma's legal guardian. Paperwork filled her tiny apartment, forms she struggled to read, letters she had to translate, meetings with social workers who scrutinized her every word and gesture. Each step felt like climbing a mountain, exhausting and intimidating, but Ling was determined. She could not imagine a life without Emma, and the thought of losing her, the little hand that fit perfectly in hers, the bright eyes that lit up at every smile, was unbearable. She endured the uncertainty, the long waiting periods, the polite but skeptical questions, because she knew the reward at the end would be worth it. Through it all, Emma remained a constant source of joy and courage. She accompanied Ling to appointments when possible, skipping happily in her small shoes, unaware of the full gravity of the situation but sensing the importance. Emma's laughter echoed through the offices, softening the tension, and her innocent questions reminded Ling of the pure, uncomplicated love that had brought them together. At home, Ling and Emma created little rituals that made the waiting easier, baking cookies and decorating them with clumsy frosting, reading stories late into the night, and sharing quiet whispers about their dreams of the future. Emma's unwavering faith in their bond became Ling's anchor, a constant reminder that this fight was not for herself alone, but for the life they could build together. Finally, the long months of paperwork, interviews, and background checks came to an end. Ling received the official notice that she had been approved to become Emma's legal guardian. Relief washed over her in overwhelming waves, bringing tears that she could not hold back. She read the letter over and over, hardly believing it was real. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she could finally call herself Emma's mother in every sense that mattered. Ling's heart swelled with gratitude and love, feelings so intense they made her chest ache. The day of the final hearing arrived. Ling held Emma's hand tightly as they walked into the courtroom, her mind racing with a mix of nerves and excitement. When the judge spoke the words that made the guardianship official, Emma squealed with delight, hugging Ling tightly as tears of joy streamed down both their faces. The courtroom, once intimidating and formal, felt like the perfect place to mark the beginning of their new life together. Ling realized that all the fear, loneliness, and uncertainty had led to this moment, a moment of triumph and love that was entirely their own. As they walked home hand in hand, Emma skipping ahead and turning back with a grin, Ling felt a sense of peace she had never known. They had built a family from trust, care, and the courage to love despite fear. Ling pressed a gentle kiss to Emma's forehead and whispered softly, "I will always be here, my sweet girl." Emma's eyes sparkled, and she whispered back, "Forever, mommy." Ling smiled, holding her daughter close, knowing that the answer was yes, forever. Their life together had just begun, and it was filled with warmth, laughter, and the unshakable bond of a love neither had expected but both desperately needed.